Hi, folks. This is Jonathan Phoenix, the Carolina Storyteller, coming to you with an important message. Okay, this is an adult podcast, so it shouldn't be listened to by children. And if you're listening to this, I assume that you're an adult. And if you're not an adult, that's bad, because some of the things that we cover on this podcast are topics that really younger ages shouldn't be listening to. There's murder, there's death, there's blood, guts, and gore. Things that really they don't want to be exposed to. So as an adult, I'm going to ask you to keep the kids away. But I don't think every one of you is doing it. So I'm going to have to do something to curb this behavior if you don't stop. Maybe I'll tell your kids where Santa's real address is. Or maybe I'll tell them where babies come from. Or how to get a hold of the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. Or maybe I'll just tell them why the mailman always brings them birthday presents and why Daddy is really mad about it. So remember, keep the kids away from the adult material and enjoy the show. This is the Carolina Storyteller.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to the Carolina Storyteller. I am your storyteller, Jonathan Phoenix. It is a pleasure to be with you here today. I apologize for the brief interlude. We were dealing with some medical issues with Crimson, and it became evident that I could not put out a decent episode last week. So instead, I just immediately focused on this one and decided that I would do an actual good episode and just take the week off instead of providing you with a not worth it episode that you weren't going to enjoy. I mean, you might have enjoyed it, but it wouldn't have been up to the standard that I think that you deserve. So this is my apology for that. But we're back. Everything is doing well. Crimson is healing. The surgery went great. We have a lot to be happy for. And we're into September. If you don't know, September is the official start of spooky season. Now nobody can complain when I walk around being excited for Halloween. You know, my spooky season technically starts in January. Some people starts November 1st. But most people, they get a little agitated if you try and get too spooky before August, and some really won't let you until September. But in September, spooky season starts, okay? It's here. You can't fight it anymore. We're in spooky season, okay? Deal with it, all right? If I want to run around talking about pumpkins and stabbings and horror movies, I'm going to do it, and you can't say smack about it until November 1st, all right? I got 2 months of all the horror and scary and spooky and ghosts and goblins I can dream about. And you can't touch me until November 1st. Ha! Spooky season is here. It's my time to shine. With spooky season being here, I am excited to bring you guys a brand new story, one I have been looking into and thinking about, one that I heard before, but I've never actually had to tell, but I'm excited about. And the story is actually about, it's about loyalty. It's about faithfulness. It's about friendship. It's about being my dog. Well, not my dog, a dog. It's about a dog, really. Dogs are amazing creatures. They really are. I recently lost my dog, and for the past few years, my dog has not lived with me. And it was my family's dog, not necessarily my dog. My dog had to live with my in-laws because we couldn't have a dog at our apartment. His name was Chief. He was a large German Shepherd. We'd had him since the early 2000s, well, the late 2000s. He was a very massive German Shepherd, and he was a very loving, caring, loyal, and faithful animal. I had a surgery on a hernia, umbilical hernia, which is where basically my belly button kind of split under the skin and my intestines kind of poked out, and they were like, oh, we need to fix that. So I was stuck in a chair for almost 6 weeks, and the entire time I was in that chair and I was injured and I was healing, I had a ever faithful companion that did not leave my side. He literally slept in the couch beside me. If I went to get up, he was there. walking with me to the bathroom. If I moaned in pain, he was going and trying to drag somebody back to make sure that I was okay. He was my nursemaid for the better part of the 6 weeks, and did not leave my side, because this is what dogs do. They are these dedicated creatures to us, and they're like that for their entire life. And every time I would go over to my in-laws, and when she was living there, he would always come up, and his head would go right to my lap so that he could get his pets and he could get his attention, because he knew his friend was there, and he wanted to be loyal to his friend. And this is where we get into our story. So our story takes place in the late 1800s, after the Civil War. After the Civil War, there was a lot of mistrust here in the South. There were a lot of issues, but there were also a lot of people trying to make money. The Civil War, understand, was fought mainly in the South. We didn't have volleys that went into the North. It's not like we raided New York City or Washington, D.C. or anything like that. They burned cities like Atlanta. They destroyed forts in Charleston. Sherman's March went, all through the state. It's state of South Carolina, state of North Carolina, state of Georgia. These were the places where these main battles were held. These were the places that suffered the most destruction during the war, and then they suffered kind of a lot more after the war, just from the effects on the economy and on the people from what had happened. There was a lot of bad blood. But that didn't change that people still had to get things. So merchants still traveled. And through Union, South Carolina, was what was known as the Old State Road. Now, it is said that all roads lead to Rome. In South Carolina and most parts of the South, really, at the time, before they built the Terminus train station in Atlanta, all roads led to Charleston. I understand this. Charleston would be the capital of the South, were it not for Terminus, which was built in Atlanta not very long after the Civil War. Terminus is the train station where all railroads lead to, including the railroad from Charleston. And that is how Atlanta became basically the capital of the South. That's a story for an entirely different time. We're talking about Union County, South Carolina right now. Anyway, a merchant was traveling Old State Road. And he was traveling his way up to North Carolina to sell his wares. This is what normally happens. People traveled around to make money. And this merchant had a stalwart and faithful companion. This companion was his dog, a Pyrenean hound. That these were large, white, mastiff-sized hounds, usually 160 to 180 pounds, standing about 2.5 to 3 foot tall on the shoulders. They were massive, massive dogs. They were originally used for herding livestock. So these were dogs that were used to move cows around. These aren't your border collies herding sheep. They're herding full on. Move it, cow, move. Their bark was just unbelievable, and their size and things. But they were very loyal, faithful. They were dedicated to their owners, and they were very friendly animals, generally. They typically were the kind you could walk up and pet, and they yip, and they loved the attention. They were man's best friend, really. Or at least a version of it. Well, this merchant and his friend came traveling through Newberry on their way to Union County, which was on the way to North Carolina, along the state road. And during this time, unfortunately, some issues happened. There were a murder and some theft. And the only new person in the area was this merchant who happened to be coming through an area known as Mabington at the time, which is, like I said, right in between Union and Newberry County along the old state road. He's the only new guy, so the townsfolk immediately arrested him, charged him, tried him, found him guilty, and executed him by hanging, all within the span of a few days. Now, I don't know about you, but I've watched a whole lot of trials on, court TV and stuff. I see the things on it all the time. I watched the O.J. Simpson trial. I watched, I'm not going to go into all the weird trials that you see on TV that I've paid attention to. But the point being is that I've never seen a investigation, arrest, trial, conviction, and execution done in a time span of 3 days. This was really quick. To add insult to injury, this man was then taken to a nearby cemetery and buried kind of outside of the cemetery grounds, kind of off the property, in the wastes, pretty much. He wasn't even honored with a proper burial. He was kind of just disposed of. Dug a hole, threw him in there. Didn't even mark his grave. His grave is still really not known where it is to this day. Now, this cemetery is Ebenezer Cemetery, and it was just off of the old state road near the Goshen Hill community in Union County. Now, I know what you're thinking. We know what happened to the poor man. What happened to that poor dog? I'm getting to that. See, the dog was, as I said, extremely loyal. And when the man was arrested, the dog stayed by the jail. When he was tried, the dog stayed near the trial. When the man was hung, the dog stayed by the gallows. No one ever fed the dog or petted the dog or showed the dog any affection, even though the dog had nothing to do with anything that was going on. He was just a dog. When the man's body was taken and basically just thrown in a hole outside of a cemetery without so much as a tombstone, the dog followed the man's corpse and stayed there, right beside the highway, howling, missing his master, and starving. No one offering food, no one offering comfort. The dog didn't do anything wrong. The dog had just lost someone it loved, someone it cared for, its best friend. We say how a dog is man's best friend, but sometimes man really isn't a good friend to dog. Sometimes we're a really horrible friend to dog. Sometimes dog deserves better. This went on for about a week and a half before a local farmer who just had enough of the dog walked out and shot it. He didn't even shoot it dead. He shot it so that it would die and walked away and left it to die. And so that is how this poor animal left this mortal world. Wounded, sad, alone, and missing his best friend. It's really sad for the poor dog. But a few months later, interesting things started to happen. Now, remember I described this dog as long white hair, massive, 180 pounds, nearly 3 foot high. Just big, brooding animal. Well, it was within about a month, along the old state road, in between the communities of Newberry and Goshen Hill, a merchant local to the area was traveling along when he came across the spectacle of a large white hound. And this hound would become known as the happy dog. The dog stood and stared him down with glowing red eyes. But the one thing he could remember was what looked like a grin on the dog's face with sharp teeth and almost just drool dribbling down as it eyed him hungrily. He gave pause, wondering if he should continue on with the dog ahead of him. And when he did that, that's when the dog came after him and chased him for miles. And suddenly, just as quickly as the dog appeared before him, the dog, before his very eyes, just seemed to vanish in nothing. And this was the first reported sighting of the hound, the happy dog. From then on, those who escaped the dog would report saying that they would be traveling along the state road between Newberry and Union County on their way towards North Carolina, and they would happen upon the visage of this animal, ghostly, shimmering almost as it came out of the woods. It would give chase, always with this big toothy grin and these glowing red eyes. They would all claim the dog to be massive, nearly half the size of a horse, and it would just pursue them relentlessly at top speed, no matter how fast they ran or rode or how fast their carriage went, always biting and snarling and trying to just get a hold to it. And though it was never reported that the dog injured everybody, it's unknown if everybody escaped the dog. We don't know how many didn't, because there are no reports that anybody didn't. But there are no reports that everybody did. The dog, for years, on foggy nights when the weather was right, would appear somewhere along the road and hound travelers who were trying to make their way between Newberry and Union, in the area of Goshen Hill. He became synonymous with the area. He became the Hound of Goshen Hill. It was said all the way up until the mid-'80s that this dog terrorized this area. Now, granted, maybe the reason that the mid-'80s was the time that it stopped is because that's when the highway moved a few miles over. The area that is now Goshen Hill, really, there's no reason to be traveling on that area anymore. The road's not really there. The highway doesn't even run through that area anymore. It's been moved a few miles over. Now, perhaps, if you're out along that highway at night, you might get a glimpse of the dog, but you're just outside of the area that he's going to chase you. But if you were to try and make your way back in towards where Ebenezer Cemetery is, it is said not to go on a foggy night. Because if you go out that way on a foggy night, you're liable to see it. The happy dog. That toothy grin. Those large, massive haunches. Those red, glowing eyes. As he chases you, biting and nipping along the way, trying to devour you, if you will. That's our story for today, folks. I hope that you liked it. I hope you found it as entertaining as I do. The Hound of Goshen Hill is really one of South Carolina's least known but most fascinating stories. And while I've never experienced it, I don't want to. Quite frankly, if the dog gets a hold of some of those people that were so mean to it, yeah, you weren't really that good to the dog. The dog doesn't need to be good to you. Sorry. If you're ever out in Union County, don't go looking for this dog. All reports say that this dog is not a very nice spirit. If you do encounter it, you're not going to have a good time. It's just not going to be nice. And believe it or not, there are reports that you can encounter it. While I said the last documented observance of the Hound of Goshen Hill was in the 80s, it doesn't mean it's the last time anybody has claimed, without having any way of, reasonably backing it up, that the hound has been spotted. People have talked about saying that someone has seen it for the past 40 years, even as recent as, 2 years ago, somebody said that they came across it while they were traveling through the woods over there. So if you are in the area of Union County, between Union and Newberry near Goshen Hill, keep an eye out. And don't go out at night, or else you might find yourself dealing with the Hound of Goshen Hill. That's our story for tonight, folks. Go ahead and remember to head over to patreon.com/The Carolina Storyteller so that you can get exclusives, hear about what's going on with Valmont, all the other fun stuff, and go to www.thecarolinastoryteller.com, TheCarolinaStoryteller.com. You can get some of our merch, you can support the show, you can tell me what you think about it, there's places to comment, send me emails, anything you want to do. You can even send me a voice message. Nobody's done that yet, but if you want to, I'm down to hear it. And maybe I'll even download it and put it on the show if it's a story. Who knows? I'd really love to hear some of your stories. So go over to thecarolinastoryteller.com. Let me know some of your stories if you've got any. Love to put them on the show. That's the show for this week, folks. Thanks so much for joining me. Again, I'm sorry about the brief hiatus, but some things needed to be handled, and they were. And now we're back. So we'll see you next week, and stay spooky, my friends.